Hello, and thanks for stopping by. This is Spreadsheet Excellence, and I'm Joe Pryor. This is the second episode, and I'm assuming at the end of the last episode, you've gotten Microsoft Office installed, and specifically for our purposes, you've gotten Microsoft Excel installed. So, before we can jump into generating content in our spreadsheets, I thought it would be important for us to take a look a little bit at how you communicate with Microsoft Excel and how Microsoft Excel communicates with you. So without further ado, let's jump in. I have here a new workbook opened in Microsoft Excel. And the first thing that we should do is figure out how to get around what we're looking at. Because if this is your first time seeing this, it can be kind of intimidating. So what you're looking at is Microsoft's ribbon. Now, this format of user interface is going to be universal in concept across all of Microsoft's various tools, Word or PowerPoint, etc. So as an example, let me go ahead and drag over my Outlook window. Outlook has a ribbon. Excel has a ribbon. Within a ribbon, you have a number of tabs. These are the individual tabs within the ribbons, and they all contain like tasks. So if you want to know about formulas, go to the Formula tab. If you want to organize your page, obviously you'll find the things you need in the Page Layout tab. So the individual tabs are used as containers, and that's the best way to think of the ribbon. If you are not sure what you're looking for, think of the closest concept and click on that tab. You should likely find what you're looking for in your container. The exception is the Home tab. Now, this is selected by default. The Home tab will have the most commonly utilized functions, formulas, and tasks on it. And that's because this is what Excel, through 30 years of user data captured, has determined to be the most commonly used things. Copy and paste, cell formatting, changing the size of your font or the size of your cells, changing the way that your outlines are displayed, for example. So your most common tasks that are focused around how Excel is going to look will typically be found here on the Home tab. In Clipboard, and you notice even here, there are further containers within the tab. So all of your font data is located here. All of the cell alignment, so where words show up in the cell, it's all contained here. How you format your numbers, how you style things in the cells. And we're going to go through all of this later when we're starting to build our document in the next episode. We're going to be building a table, and I want to go through all those steps with you. And we're going to use all of this stuff in building that table. And so you'll have a completed workbook at the end that will look like what we're building here in the video, and we'll go from there. But we need to use all of this stuff to get there. And I just need you to see where it is. So you've got an idea of the top of the screen, but as you can see, the top of the screen doesn't take up the majority of your workbook. So what do we have going on down here? This is your worksheet. And as you can see in the bottom of the page, we have sheet 1. If you were to click on this little plus, you would create sheet 2, which looks oddly enough identical to sheet 1. And sheet 3 would look identical to sheet 1, etc., and so forth. If you were to right click on the name sheet 1 here, you could rename it, because after all, sheet 1, sheet 2, sheet 3 are not good names for your pages of your book. They're fine when you're working on them, but if you come back to it a month or 6 months or a year later, you might not know what's supposed to be on each sheet. And if you share it with your friends or your coworkers, then they will definitely not know what you've put on each sheet, even if to you it's obvious that this is the income statement and the next sheet is your balance sheet, and then the next sheet's your profit and loss report. That might not be apparent to a new user who hasn't utilized your workbook before. Now, before we get into cell references, I wanted to take a look at getting around some of the options. So you'll notice when I click home or insert or page layout, we just get new tabs or new ribbons opened up. But when we click file, we get taken to a whole new window, and this will look familiar to when you opened Excel in the first place. To get to where we were a second ago, I clicked on blank notebook and I just created a new one. You'll see book 2. So if you click on file, it'll take you back to kind of the launcher. And one of the wonderful things that Excel does is this launcher is very useful and very powerful. So you have the option to create a blank workbook. You also have the option to take a look at a number of these tutorial Excel workbooks. So these are created by Microsoft, and they are an excellent walkthrough for these particular functions. And we're going to go over many of these functions, but I recommend that you take a look at this in your free time in addition or separately from whatever we're going to cover in the videos. Now, the buttons on the left here are all hopefully fairly self-explanatory. If you needed to create a new workbook, if you wanted to open an existing workbook, etc. If you save the workbook you're currently working on, save as is more powerful, and we're going to take a look at that in a second. Print opens a preview of the worksheet you've created and allows you to figure out where on the sheet you want it to go. We're going to take a look at how to configure the print screen after we've created our workbook. So later in this presentation, we're going to focus on not just how you print it, but also how you make it presentable to the end user so that it looks good. Info is important if you're trying to configure your Excel workbook to be secure. So if you need to make sure that no one can make changes, click protect. And you can make it so that they have to always be read-only. Or if you want to make sure that this thing is really locked down, you can attach a password to it so that no one can really get a look at it. Similarly, you can also restrict access. So certain people can see the worksheet, but they can't actually do anything with it. And all of these give you the opportunity to lock a certain piece of data so that if you've got a worksheet that is sort of your final figures for presentation, someone can't go in after the fact and edit them and have the numbers come out wrong or incorrect. Additionally, you can add metadata. Now, these are useful for providing additional tags or for organization, and some of this metadata will be viewable in Windows File Explorer. So here's a Microsoft Windows File Explorer window, and in it we have a number of documents and forms. And you can attach metadata. Now, typically a lot of this stuff isn't shown by default, but you can right-click in the top of this window where it says name, status, date modified, etc. You can add new forms or new fields and say, oh, I'd like to take a look at the tags. Tags are important because you could come here and say, oh, this is an accounting textbook or an accounting worksheet, and it's also useful for financial analysis. And then even if someone didn't know for sure what they were looking for in your Excel workbook, if they wanted to take a look at any accounting workbook, they'd be able to click on that. So the info tab allows you to attach a lot of special data. If you worked on this by yourself, or if you worked on this as a group, you can add authors to it, etc. There's a lot of power here in the info tab that is useful for flagging data surrounding your Excel sheet. Save as is equally important. This will pull up commonly used files, but it will also allow you to save the workbook in a number of different formats. Now, for the most part, you're going to want to save it as an Excel workbook, but there are a number of other ways you can save your file that are separate. If you need to save it as an older format, if your client doesn't have modern Office, doesn't have modern versions of Office, you can send them this. If you're downloading your data into a SQL database or into R for data analysis or a number of other tools that are only able to read CSVs, which is a comma separated value sheet, then you can save your workbook as a CSV. Now, do note that saving anything as a CSV will strip out the vast majority of formatting, because the idea of a CSV is that it's basically a text document. Like, here's a text document, and it's just a bunch of commas separating all the values, and a comma is read as being a new row of data. So you have power over what kind of document you save it as. However, in 99% of cases, I'm going to recommend just save it as a Microsoft Excel workbook, or later on, when we take a look at macros, a macro-enabled workbook. For the most part, these top two should use solid for the majority of your time. But be aware that this Save As Type button pull-down gives you a lot of that power. All right, so we've taken a look at info, we've taken a look at Save As, we'll take a look at print later, publish, if you had a connection with Microsoft Power BI, or later, additionally Tableau or any of these data visualization tool sets would be also an excellent way to get that data out there. But a lot of those tool sets have ways to import their data from their front end, and honestly, just use that. The last two things I want to show you here in this user interface before we talk about cell references are the account tab on the very bottom here. And this lets you make sure that you're logged in on your appropriate user. So I'm logged in. I have Office through school. I have the exact same version of Office through Symphony. So it doesn't really matter too much on my personal use case as to where I get it or how I use it. Here you also have some sort of aesthetic choices in terms of what you want. You'll notice up here in the top right, when I mouse up and down these things, they all change. Now I like spring, but that really doesn't matter. And then your theme, this lets you choose the way that Excel looks. So each of these pull downs has a different kind of look to them, and that's all, again, personal preference into how you want your version of Excel to look. Lastly, let's take a look at options. Now, for the most part, this is getting too deep into the weeds for most users. You can leave a lot of these values as their defaults. However, I want to call your attention to the Customize Ribbon buttons. And we talked about ribbons earlier in this video. So Customize Ribbon allows you to configure exactly what's going to show up on the ribbon or what's not. So for example, I'd like to have the developer ribbon show up. And I click OK, and all of a sudden the developer ribbon shows up. Additionally, with options, you have the ability to turn on or turn off various add-ins that are baked into Excel. These are already installed. They're part of Excel by default, but most users will not need to use them. So the Analysis Tool Pack, if you are doing anything that involves statistics, the Analysis Tool Pack will bake in a lot of functionality to Excel that will grant you the power to gather and analyze descriptive statistics about large data sets. Similarly, Solver allows you to plug in a series of constraints and rules and desired outcomes given a set of resources, and Solver will find for you the most efficient way to utilize those resources. Now, as a joking way to utilize Solver, people have built models in Solver to pick for them the best possible fantasy football team, and those teams have done pretty well because the stats all lined up. However, as usual, if you build the model poorly, it won't give you good output. So do be aware. Let me show you one more time how to get to these things. Click on File, you have Account, and then Options in the bottom left. And Account options are where a lot of this customization comes in to the equation. All right, so let's wrap this up by taking a look at cell references. So you'll notice when I click around on the worksheet here that whenever I land in a cell, this row, or this column up here and this row on the left, they become highlighted. You'll also notice that G and 4 coincide with the number here in the name box. So if you don't know where you're at on this Excel sheet, you can always take a look in the name box, or you can always take a look at the cell reference that's highlighted for you, F and 8. Now this does work if you select multiple cells. So we click in C6 and we drag the mouse over to F6 and then down. You'll notice now that we have C6 through F8 selected. Now it only says C6 here. Why? Because C6 is the box that's highlighted. That's the cell reference, and cell references are vital for the purposes of building more complicated Excel spreadsheets that don't require you, the personal user, to fill in every single cell by yourself. Let's also talk about getting around the Excel spreadsheet. So that you'll notice here my mouse is right now a thicker plus sign. If I go in the Excel sheet and I navigate right here on the edge and I place my mouse right over the edge, it becomes a thinner plus sign with a little mouse over it. This is called the move mouse. So this is the selection mouse. This is the move mouse. This takes whatever's in D10 and moves it to wherever I drop it. So let's write in a word. And let's move it from D10 to E5. Right here, E5. Drop it and it moves it. That can get you in a lot of trouble if you're building Excel sheets and you move data that is reliant, like other parts of the sheet are reliant on. So be careful with that move selector. There's a third way you can utilize your Excel mouse, and that's in the bottom right. You notice now it's just a thinner plus. And what that does is it takes whatever you've done here and it copies it somewhere else. This is a smarter tool than that, however. So if I do word 1, let's find out what happens now. If I drag it down, it should say word 2 and word 3. So it takes the rules of what you've done into it, word, and it continues it. Now it works a little bit differently if you just type in a number. Interesting. But what if I did something different? 20, 21, 22, and 23. Okay, so I've manually entered all these things. If I drag and select all of these things, and then I click on the little plus here, and I drag it down, it should continue the series. So your black plus right here on the edge, and you click on the thick square right there. It's a very powerful tool set for taking sequential data and continuing it across. Example, some of these things are just baked into Excel. If you click on, you write Jan, and you drag it across, what do you think is going to happen? February, March, April, etc. This is just programmed into Excel. If you need to build a calendar, Excel's got you covered. So you have those tools. Additionally, if you click up here, you'll notice that this mouse here changes. So this down arrow selects everything in that row or that column, and this side arrow selects everything in that row. But if you go to the edge, you get kind of this resizing function. If you want to resize your column automatically, double click this and it goes down to the size of the text in it. Now notice E has more stuff in the column. So when I do that, it's not going to be as narrow, even though April is the same width of word as Jan. Why? Because it's using word 1, 2, and 3 here to define how large these columns should be. So we are going to get into a lot more in the next episode. We've already gone over on time, and I'd like to start having you actually build something in the next episode. So thanks for sticking this out. I know we've gotten 2 episodes in and you haven't even written anything down yet, but we're almost there. And in the next episode, we're going to start building our shared workbook together. So I can't wait to see you then. Have a wonderful couple of days. And this is Joe Pryor saying I'll see you next time on Spreadsheet Excellence.